Welcome, everybody. Happy Thursday. All right, so we're not in Black History Month anymore, which means I have moved my topic from racial issues to now we're talking about election 2024. You see it on the screen. All right, we got a Biden versus Trump rematch. It's pretty much what's in the cards. Now, everybody was pretty much predicting that this was going to be a long time ago, but we just had Super Tuesday. And for those of you that don't know what Super Tuesday was, this past Tuesday was Super Tuesday. That is part of the primary election. And the primary election is basically an election that's to determine who ends up being the candidate for each party. So who the Democrats get to have as their candidate and who the Republicans have as their pendant. They go through all the states starting in January and work their way down through like June or something like that to go through all the states. And then they have a convention in the summertime, basically where they officially select the candidate. But usually the primary is over. Well, not over. They still have elections, but people have dropped out of the race fairly early on based on race results early on. Because there tends to be a momentum to it. They stage it out. There's Iowa tends to vote first, then New Hampshire, and so on and so forth. And there's also some movements to try to change that up within the parties and stuff. So there's some stuff with that going on. But anyways, there tends to be a momentum that happens there. So once you win one race, next thing you know, you're polling a little bit better in the next race and so on and so forth. So it starts snowballing. And so then there's issues about, well, why does this state with this type of demographics that's more likely to choose this type of candidate first or second or third? Why do they get those early chances to influence people to give that momentum to because by the time you get to Super Tuesday, a lot of times the race is already decided before then. The whole point of Super Tuesday was to have a day where a whole bunch of states would have their primary election all at once to figure out who they would support with their delegates for the nomination. And so it would hopefully be able to end the race after that point. And that's kind of what it did here this year for the Republican Party, because Nikki Haley finally dropped out of the race. But Nikki Haley, she never did have that good of a chance all the way up to Super Tuesday. She hadn't won a race yet. She even lost her own home state that she used to be governor of, South Carolina. Usually candidates tend to win their home states a lot of times. So that's a good thing that they usually look forward to. However, she didn't win that one just because Trump is just such a huge, cult-like figure. I hate to avoid that word, but it's to a certain extent that it just simply applies. But he has such a strong following on the right wing that it's just that they're pretty faithful and loyal to him at the end of the day. So he definitely has his tons of flaws. I think most people, especially for listening to this broadcast, you probably know that already. But yeah, they're gonna go with him regardless. So it's pretty obvious that was gonna happen. Nikki Haley was staying in. My gut feeling was that she was just gonna stay in and ride along till maybe Trump goes to jail or something, or maybe they can find a way to put somebody else on the ballot or something that Trump doesn't work out because he has all these other pending litigation against him and stuff. So I think there was a kind of a Trump alternative, never Trump, whatever you want to call that. That was kind of rooting for somebody as an alternative. And so she ends up winning as the alternative because Trump didn't even debate in any of the Republican primary debates. He just decided, I'm going to focus on my my trials and stuff, my different court appearances that I have to show up to and stuff like that, because he found it advantageous. And I actually think that is a advantageous strategy for him. The Republican Party tends to like Trump more the more trouble he gets into. The more people don't like him, they kind of hold on to and support him even stronger. They dig their heels in. Whether it's Trump's fault or or not, they're always going to pretty much mark it as them picking on Trump. It's never his own fault. So that's the narrative. So it's like, hey, the media hates him, the Democrats hate him, and all, whatever. All the other FBI, the CIA, because they decide, or the Department of Justice, they decide to prosecute Trump for stuff that he actually did. And we have evidence for, and they pretty much just say, They just hate him, so therefore they're picking on him and they're trying to influence elections, and they don't really put much thought into the facts and details or anything. It's just goes straight to there. So, but that's just the nature of what we have there. So that race is pretty much decided, but there was a little bit of debate there. But for the most part, Trump throughout most of this primary was polling nationwide, having a majority of support, like more than 50% support throughout most of the primary season. And so that means the other candidates, the multiple other candidates who are running for election, they were splitting the remaining minority of the vote that was left. So even if all those people coalesce, they vote together behind one candidate, they still weren't likely to beat Trump. And so that's why pretty much everybody knew that he would end up being the nominee. Of course, with on the Joe Biden side, usually when the incumbent president that's currently in office is running for reelection, uh, pretty much they tend to win their primary pretty easily. Most of the big name people don't even try to run against them. So they just kind of stand back and let them win their primary and just try to repeat it a second time, because there is a little bit of an incumbent effect where once you won the office once, you have a higher, you have a better chance of winning again, versus having somebody fresh and new that might be untested or something like that. So unless that presidency went 100% horribly bad, which I don't think not Trump, but Biden's presidency has gone horribly bad, in terms of comparing it to other modern presidents. Economically, the economy is doing actually pretty good when you look at the metrics in terms of record low unemployment. Jobs number every month is just huge, and income rates are going up. Of course, we had some the inflation is no longer a problem or issue, but it was a problem previously. And so I think that was the main economic part that most folks held against Biden. And that's because in general, the rule of thumb, if you look at what happens over the years, if the economy is bad, it's more likely that the party that's currently in office is going to be voted down and the other party is going to get in. But if the economy is doing good, then they're likely to be reelected back into office. So that's just how things tend to go. People blame the president for everything. It's just how it goes. And even though they don't have that much control over it, that's just psychologically how us Americans are wired and how we understand things. And that's how we debate things. So, the politicians have learned that they can just talk bad about presidents and how the economy is doing and blame it on the president, and they can score points and get a better chance of winning by doing that. And so both sides do that fairly effectively. I think the Republicans do a better job of doing it than Democrats do. But 9 times out of 10, it's probably something that the president had very little impact, if any, whatsoever, and it had something to do. And that's what's the case for the inflation. Well, basically that inflation came uh, after the Russian conflict with the Ukraine started up. They invaded Ukraine, started creating issues there. It was basically around oil prices and concerns about that, not being available. But once the market speculators, speculation starts happening about the oil prices that makes the prices go up for that, you're pretty much going to face prices that go higher on just about all goods, because everything requires oil. You're shipping it on trucks, you're shipping stuff on boats, planes, whatever, right? And so there's a added cost that goes inside there that causes inflation. So there was inflation all the way across the board, to where it kind of had a compound effect, and it was global, it was worldwide. I think the Republicans tried to do their best to make it look like that inflation was due to Biden passing those the stimulus package or whatever. But again, Trump had passed a couple of them already before that. Combined together, that was way more than Biden. So it's just a matter of it's really not that was causing it. That was not the straw that broke the camel's back. It was because otherwise it would have been the local inflation just here in the United States. You wouldn't have seen it worldwide. The simple fact that it was worldwide on a huge scale, we might have a big impact on the world, but not that huge of an impact on the world. But the simple fact that it was worldwide like that just gives you clue that it really wasn't just that bill that pumped some money into just America. It was actually a more global thing. And oil prices is global. So, however, the average citizen is not going to be aware of this. They're not paying attention to enough to how this stuff works. And so those are just easy points to score. And if you can get folks mad enough, you can get in the office. So you got to play that game. However, right now, this is where things stand. So we got Biden versus Trump rematch is going down pay-per-view. Well, it's not on pay-per-view, but what if it was? And they were slugging it out. That'd be pretty interesting. No, I don't want to do that. So uh a lot of folks did not want to see this rematch, right? I mean, if you remember 4 years ago, back in 2020, when they were going at it, people were complaining, saying, oh, we got these two old people that's going against each other, man. I would just wish that we somebody else was there. I didn't vote for neither one of them in the primary. I voted every primary, but I didn't vote for neither one of them either. But that's what people make those complaints, and that pretty much is kind of the cynical spirit that everybody has almost every year, pretty much. You go back before that, it was like, oh, not Trump and Hillary. I mean, Hillary wasn't super old, but it still was like, oh, not Trump and Hillary. Oh, not Obama and Romney. And but actually, I think there were more Democrats that actually liked Obama. The similar to the way that some of the Republicans actually do like Trump. They're super gung ho about Trump, because Trump is either you love him or you hate him type of guy. You're either all in for Donald Trump or you're all out. You pretty much know where you're standing. And that's why I was effective in predicting how the polls would turn out in the last election. You got a lot of you guys followed me on social media around that period of time, and I gave my predictions on what would happen and told you guys, step by step through the election night, how and a forecast of how things would turn out. Told you you hear a lot of noise and talk and all this other stuff, but I was cutting through the clatter and just telling you what it is, and that's pretty much how it panned out for the most part. So, but part of the reason why I was accurate with that is because a lot of people put down polls and say they're not accurate. Polls are actually accurate. Polls, it's the same science as it's basically science at the end of the day. It's probability, mathematics. Businesses spend billions of dollars every year paying people that know data science and can do this polls and work with these numbers like that in order to get better products. They give feedback surveys. They give you free products and say, hey, you get a free burger if you fill out this survey, free drink with your next order, is that type of stuff. If you fill out this survey, they invest so much into this stuff because it works. The people that are rich, they use it. All right. So it works. The people that are trying to convince you that it don't work really just don't want you to influence your belief, because like I said, there's just like in the primary, there's a momentum that kind of happens where people just got the one win and the next win and the next win. It's like, okay, suddenly you see a candidate growing in strength, and their nomination to lead the party is just going to be inevitable. Well, that same thing can happen in polls to a certain extent. People see a poll and just say, "Ooh, such and such is winning." So go ahead and once they see that poll, Candace was like, well, hold on, hold your horses, don't climb on their wagon and get behind them, because a lot of folks they'll keep their mouth shut. They don't even want to pick a favorite candidate until they see who's actually winning out there, and then once they know who's winning, they want to pick the winning person so they can say, hey, I was right the whole time. There's a lot of that type of stuff that goes on too. So there's some psychological warfare that goes on. So people tell you, say, hey, don't worry about the polls and all that other stuff. There's also, especially when it comes close to election time, when you start seeing polls come out, because polls basically just tell you what's going on at that time when the poll was taken. So polls are usually taken over a few days span, maybe a couple days, 2 or 3 days or something like that. And so it really just gives you in general what people are feeling during that time period that the poll was taken, right? People's moods are changing and all that as time goes on, right? So it's not telling you what's going to happen in the election day. It doesn't predict future. It just gives you a snapshot of what's going on at that period in time. And because of that, polls can also influence people sometimes too. Because if all of a sudden you see a poll that says such and such, your favorite candidate's going to win, or well, the poll doesn't say that, but a lot of times news reporters and people will cite it saying that that's what a poll says. There are no polls that says such and such is going to win. That's not what polls do. They just tell you a rough estimate about where people stand on currently at that point in time. But usually, a lot of people say, hey, such and such is going to win. You don't have to worry about it. So a lot of folks are like, oh, shoot, such and such is going to win. Well, that's the only reason I was coming out to vote anyways. If he's going to win, I'm going to stay home. And then the problem is, once you have that mindset, you're probably not the only person that has that mindset. there's going to be other folks that have that mindset too that want to sit back. And so even if a candidate's winning by too much, those candidates might push back on that and say, hey, don't listen to those polls. Don't get too comfortable. You still got to show up and vote. This is all dependent on if you actually show up and vote. So turnout is everything at the end of the day. All right. So with that said, let's talk about these two candidates that we have here. Donald Trump. Uh, like I said, you either love him or hate him. You know what he is, right? There's not too much else to say about him. I will speak about the last thing he did, before he left office, which was, the Stop the Steal rally and all that stuff, and when all his supporters ended up attacking the Capitol. After it happened, you can watch the live news feeds of what Fox News was showing that day or any other news channel you want to that's on any side of the political spectrum, and they're pretty much all unanimous. And even the politicians, such as like Mitch McConnell, for example, a lot of them came out boldly and spoke pretty harshly about Trump and said that he was wrong, he's behind it, he takes responsibility, that type of thing. It wasn't until the news started happening, the news heads and stuff, the pundits and all that stuff started spinning and retelling the story. They said, oh, the media is just trying to trick you, they're just editing it and trying to find. Well, they were just showing live footage. They just had their camera. They're not editing when they're showing live footage, right? So that it's a little bit of crazy stuff that happens afterwards, that people rewrite new narratives and all this other stuff, because bottom line is they want to get Trump out the hook. They didn't want him to get impeached and all this other stuff, and so now we have this new reality that we're dealing with. But that whole Stop the Steal thing all happened because they were able to throw some shade over the election, basically throw some doubt in it. Doubt without evidence. All right. At the end of the day, a lot of people will say there's reports that such and such. What is reports? All it takes is one person to actually claim something. One random person, doesn't have to be nobody of significance that know nothing about nothing. But if you hear one person, somebody can type it out on Facebook, that gives news stations that want to deliver a certain message the right to be able to say there are reports that we see buses of illegals coming in, from Mexico and dropping them off at election offices. Like, any evidence of this? Any video cameras? Turn on the camera at the stoplight and you can see the bus riding through, right? What bus number it? We don't have none of that, right? It's just a whole bunch of stuff people make up. And the same thing was that's been happening for years, even before Trump, right? I've been hearing those buses of legal stuff during the Obama days. So what Trump did in terms of sowing doubt into the election is nothing new. Usually they wait until after, once the election's up and going to make those type of claims that all this crazy stuff is happening, because at the end of the day, if based on the polling and different things like that, that you're probably not going to do a good showing or something like that, you're not going to win, or maybe you don't have a majority, even if you win the presidency, because you don't have to have the majority vote of the country in order to win the presidency, because it's based on the electoral college. If that type of stuff happens, sometimes people have to save face and be like, have to explain why they're still dominating, especially for the Republican Party, because since it's been since George H.W. Bush, he was in office, he won in 1988, so he had 4 years after that. But then Clinton beat him, so he's a one-term president. But it wasn't until after he got out, till when he won in 1988. That's like 30 something years ago, right? It wasn't since then that since then there's only won the majority vote one time for the presidency. So we had several, like 8, 9 different presidential elections since then. They have not won the majority vote, only one time since then. That was Bush's second. W. Bush is his second term. In 2004, he won the majority vote then, and that was largely because of the 9/11 had happened. There was a lot of solidarity in the country that came behind him and supported him, because he happened to be the man that was in office at that time, and he stood there brave and firm, and they're gonna pay and all this other stuff. He did his job during that. So and then also he started the Iraq war after that, and a lot of folks, based on what happened in 9/11, just kind of went in and supported him on the Iraq War too. All right. So a lot of that rode off of kind of foreign policy is what happened with Bush winning that election. But but other than that, all the elections, the Democrats won the popular vote. They won a majority of the votes. And actually, I've been telling folks that I don't think that the Republicans will have a majority of the vote ever again, unless things radically change about the parties. Something like a switching up that happened after the Civil Rights Act in 1964 was passed, for example. There's gonna have to be some change in direction that's gonna happen. Basically, the way that people continue their same voting patterns demographically along the same lines, and the way current trends are going, they're not likely to win another election, at least a popular vote. Now they can, gerrymander some district lines or whatever to get some extra um, districts that they can make that's solidly Republican and things like that, to get some advantages so that in electoral college they'll have an advantage. But when it comes to just the total number of people voting and majority picking the Republican Party, I think those days are gone. At best, if they're going to have the plurality, not a majority, but a plurality. A lot of people don't know the difference on two words, but a majority means you have more than 50%, right, of the vote. Plurality just says you have the most votes, more than all the other candidates. It doesn't have to be more than 50%. So, like, if there are three different candidates, for example, and let's say that one candidate has 40% of the vote, another candidate has 35% of the vote, and the third candidate has 25%. The candidate had 40% won because they have the most. If you add all three of those numbers, it adds up to 100%, right? But that 40% is not a majority, right? Uh, so I think it's possible to have a plurality if for one day that there ends up being a third party candidate that has a good showing or something like that, that actually is able to compete or something like that, to the point where nobody gets a majority of the vote. Then there's a possibility, especially if they take it away from a lot of the vote away from Democrats, that third candidates, then that's the way that they would have even a plurality. But otherwise, I don't think they can have a majority or a plurality unless a third candidate shows up in the mix. They won't have majority, period. Actually, is what my prediction based on the trends of things. And it's not just me that thinks that. If you look back to 2012, after Barack Obama beat Mitt Romney in that election, and the Republican Party did what they called an autopsy. They made this big old report and then looked at all the factors that led into why they lost, basically. And the ultimate conclusion came to is that they needed to diversify their party. They need to reach out and expand their base. Their base is majority white, and so they needed to include a larger portion of the minority races and ethnicities into their coalition. Basically, they had to broaden up their tent and reach out to other people. And so, if you actually read that document that they had, you'll find out that as they explain their plans on what they suggest that they do, it's not that they're just reaching out to all minorities of all types or whatever. Most of their focus was on Hispanics, not necessarily African Americans, like they've made overtures to try to in the past or whatever. So it was more so the Hispanic vote they were trying to court, and so they were recommending immigration reform. Actually, not blocking it this time and be real about trying to pass it. They put Marco Rubio on top of it, and but it ended up being toxic to the base, basically, and all the talking heads on talk radio and right wing radio and right wing TV and stuff. And so it ended up becoming not popular. So that by 2016, in that primary race, Marco Rubio was not even trying to claim his own bill that he was trying to spearhead and get passed as a result of what happened in 2012. So they had to disavow all of that. And plus, you had somebody like Trump come in who definitely wasn't trying to expand the base. He kind of doubled down on the same base. But a bottom line is, we've known since at least 2000, if not earlier, that by around 2040 to 2050 ish, the nation's demographics would change from being majority white to being majority minority. Basically, all the different minority groups will suddenly become more than 50%, and the white race would be less than 50%. Finally, around 2040 ish. So there's been projections about that, and we've been moving along that path all along this time. Um, And so there's been, let me pause for a second as I explain things, but these things have been true. Uh, we've been knowing this. The data's been showing it. Studies been doing it, and it's been showing online all this time. Um, and I look at it. What I've been talking about everything, even over the past month when I talk about race and all this other stuff. I always take a bird's eye view. You don't hear me going into each individual story. See what had happened with George Floyd and Trayvon Martin and Ahmaud Arbery and all that. That's looking at the trees. I tend to explain the forest, the big picture, because I think that's what people miss. People don't, and that's what I think people listen to me for, because I'm pretty good at seeing the big picture. But the big picture is the trends of how people vote along demographic lines. And I'll explain it this way. If you go back to Reagan versus Dukakis, that was the last like super blowout where almost all the states, except for like maybe a couple of them or something, voted for one candidate, Reagan. After that, it's been pretty tight, close races for the most part in the electoral college. But if you even go back to that, demographically, we voted the same way as we do nowadays. It's not that big of a difference in terms of how the different demographics vote if you look at the exit polls. So, what's actually changed to where, back then the Republican parties were winning, but now Democrats parties are winning, is that again, the demographics themselves have changed. Certain portions of Democrats have gotten larger and others gotten smaller as a total percentage of the population uh, of registered voters. And basically that alone has been the biggest driving force in changing who ends up winning and who doesn't win, because none of the parties have been effective in winning over voters with messaging. And actually, these days, they don't even try to win with messaging. I know they want people to think that they're winning with the message. And of course, they're going around the country and they're telling the message, and they'll try, of course, there's some people that will win with messaging, but think about it. When you debate with somebody on social media or even real life, maybe your significant other, how often do you get them to say, you know what? I think you're right. That's rare, right? You don't There's not too many minds that you can change these days. The majority of people are set in their mindset. So the biggest thing is not so much um it's not so much trying to change people's mind and have the biggest winning argument. They've kind of A lot of parties have given up on that for the most part. I mean, they try to feed talking points and narratives or whatever and combat some, bad, and make people look bad, and fight against some bad notions and mindsets that are out there. But on the overall whole, the major story, the biggest push of what they try to do is to get their people out, get their people to the polls to vote, make sure they don't sit on the couch at home. That's what it is. So you get your people to show up to vote and and if you can, convince the other folks to stay at home. And so that's why you hear different stuff about maybe, oh, if you feel like the black votes too Democratic, if you don't want them to vote, then you'll have some folks that'll do robocalls to a whole bunch of a black community, telling them the wrong election date to try to make sure they don't show up. Different stuff like that. That happens just about every election cycle. So you have different stuff like that. But there's also, and that's actually illegal if you do that. So don't even think about doing that yourself. Uh, but also, there are also ways that aren't illegal that you can still do that type of influence too. If you think about, well, first of all, I think in 2016, an effective strategy was because you had a whole bunch of folks based on the primary and what happened in the Democratic Party, and Hillary Clinton ended up winning. You had a whole bunch of Bernie friends that were mad and angry and get turned against the Democratic Party back then or whatever. And they might have still came home, as they call it, and voted Democrat to help Hillary win back then. But what Trump did effectively is that, well, not Trump himself necessarily, but I'd say his team, his surrogates, and people around him, Kellyanne Conway especially, because a lot of times if you listen to Kellyanne Conway, she didn't necessarily um, defend everything Trump did, because Trump does and says a lot of crazy stuff that's kind of hard to defend, as indefensible. And so if somebody says, "What do you have to say, Kellyanne Conway, about Trump when he said blah blah blah?" Usually she doesn't even try to defend what he says. What she does instead is says, well, what aboutism, basically. It's kind of like, well, the Democrats are just as bad because back when Barack Obama did this, or back when Joe Biden did this, or back when Hillary Clinton did this, or they go way back if they got to, Bill Clinton when he did that in the 90s, right? So that's usually how, if you remember the Trump presidency, how most of the return deflection arguments basically tended to work. You don't have to defend Trump as much as make the other side look just as bad. And what ends up happening is you have this spirit where everybody's like, you know what? I'm sick and tired of all this mess with both of the parties. They look just as bad. They've convinced me that they look bad. So both sides are terrible. So therefore, I'm sick and tired of all of them. I'm just gonna stay home. I'll stick it to them, right? Uh, but usually that's an intentional strategy by one party to the other party to actually get voters like that to stay home, because they know that that Trump party knows that they're not going to be able to convince a huge portion of Democrats to vote for Trump, because it's a lot of things about the to that base of voters that's just going to be repulsive, and vice versa. So instead of doing that, instead the better it's better to just get them fed up with their own party, mad at their own party, whether it's mad over how the primary went, working WikiLeaks and all this other stuff, and hopping on that bandwagon, right? Getting folks disaffected to where they're like, man, I'm sick and tired of all this. I'm fatigued with it, and I just don't want to show up to vote. And that creates margins where people can get victories and win. So just realize that I think a lot of folks think that voter apathy, that when they just put their hands up and says, I'm sick and tired of both sides, all the back and forth, I'm gonna just equally blame everybody, they feel like they're sticking it to one side or another. But usually there's one party that advantages that, and a lot of times in politics I'll notice that one party even intentionally encourages it. They do stuff to mess up everything on purpose and then deny it afterwards, and say, try to turn it into a blame game. And once people see the fingers pointing back and forth, they just get mad at both people. They don't want to take the time to investigate and figure out, all right, what's going on here. And that's how things fall apart. But anyways, bottom line is that our demographics have been changing up. The especially the Hispanic population has been growing the fastest in here in American, and I'd say about 2/3 or so of that base of voters tend to vote Democrat, and the other third, roughly a Republican. So it ends up being a huge Republican Democrat advantage from that standpoint. Of course, we know the black base, they also vote majority Democrat as well in the 80s and 90%. So up to 95 percentage over the years, depending on who the candidates are. Right, it's a little bit of fluctuation, but again, and so because of those type of things, you have people that try to influence elections by drawing certain zones around certain communities that happen to be certain colors, and drawing the boundaries certain ways. Because every 10 years in the when we have our census, those lines get redrawn, and whoever's in power in the state legislature, a lot of folks pay attention to the federal government level. They don't pay attention to what's going on in states, and that's actually where a lot of stuff is happening at the state level. People are asleep on it. If you're mad at the presidents, don't stay home for that. You should be voting for your locals and state representatives as well, because they have way more influence on you in your everyday life than some of the other folks. But yeah, so it's the state folks that draw those boundaries and determine what ends up who ends up having an advantage. And they do their numbers, they know what they're doing there. I think they should just let a computer model, AI, whatever, try to fairly draw it out based on some certain rules, so you don't have these weird shaped boundaries that do some weird stuff just to try to thinly with the scalpel cut out the population, one side of the street voting in one place and another side of the street voting somewhere else, and all this other stuff. It's it's a lot of crazy stuff that goes on with that. But people do it to win an advantage. One of the worst places like where that happens at is in Wisconsin. So nonetheless, um but that's where the trends are going, that's where things are going. And then pretty much the after the autopsy happened, the Republican Party said, "This is what we need to do." The Republican base said, "Nah, forget that. We just doubling down on Trump." And Trump was like, "No, we ain't trying to expand the base. We just trying to do what we want to do. Get rid of them immigrants, so they can stop influencing the vote. Basically, that's what it comes down to. And then we can try to make America great again. Basically, so that's been on standby. And maybe after Trump's out of here, if we still have a democracy and all that stuff, then then maybe they can get back to trying to expand the base again. But right now, they see that hey, Trump won this way, and so we're going to try to ride this as far as we can. And actually, they're kind of stuck with it because they put all their support and backing behind Trump, to where they have to just ride this pony out until it's done. And they can't go back on it until it's fully out of the way, and then they can try to think about resetting or something like that. Because even a lot of the Republicans, they don't like him, but they feel like they have to because the base likes him, and if they turn against him, then usually the base turns against that politician, and so that's kind of how it is. Even with Nikki Haley, uh, throughout most of the primary election, she wouldn't even say anything bad about Trump whatsoever. It wasn't until it started becoming a two-person race that she finally started attacking Trump and saying, the things that we all obviously know is true about Trump, and going against him and stuff. So because a lot of them are trying to, walk that tight line. How do I try to get away, to position myself to be the best candidate and win without pissing off these voters that are extremely loyal to Trump? And if look like you're against him, they've shown over the years they vote people out of office and make them pay prices. They retire politicians that don't like Trump, that are never Trumpers, and so on and so forth. Um, so that's what they have to deal with. They have to rely on the base. Trump has a strong hold in the base, and so therefore Trump ends up having a strong hold on the politicians, and the Republican Party is kind of held hostage by it. Is what's going to end up happening. I can go deeper into that, but I won't necessarily do so, because there's some other things that I want to discuss. And what I want to discuss is how do we tend to vote for candidates? How do we vote for candidates? We as American people, we like to fall in love with our candidates. It's like a love story. I want to fall in love. I want, you know, a lot of folks are complaining about the two current candidates that we have right now, because how do you fall in love with Joe Biden? He doesn't give these sexy, attractive speeches that I'm used to. I mean, Obama might have gave those great speeches that I fell in love and had dreamy eyes and just, but Biden doesn't do that, right? No, it doesn't give you that good feeling inside your soul. And what are we voting for? Are we voting for somebody to give us good feelings, or are we voting somebody to actually be a president that makes the right choice for us, right? And stuff like that. A lot of times we're not voting, we're not picking based on the things that matter most. And that's why I say we make our choices for president similar to how we make our choices for people we date. All right, the people we get into relationships with. So while we say that, hey, I'm looking for somebody who has this good character quality and has these, all this about them. A lot of times in that list of stuff, they don't mention like, well, I need somebody that has good game, because if you ask most of them, let's say I'm gonna talk about when it comes to women liking men, because, and I'm gonna focus that direction only because our whole history of presidents has been male, and so therefore I want to focus on what it means to be attractive as a male, so that a woman would pick you. So, and I'm going to parallel that to how politics happen. And so, but for a lot of women, they might not list, when they're saying, oh, there are no good men out here, and they listen to qualities, they usually don't list how good their game is, how smooth they are with their tongue, as one of the top reasons why they date somebody. But if you ask the men that are actually getting all types of dates, can have their way with as many women as they want to, almost, a lot of them will attribute their success to their smooth tongue, right? How well they can work that mouthpiece, basically. So a lot of times we actually make decisions based upon, these social features. How what are your social skills? How well you speak and stuff. And that's why we're focused a lot on how much people are stuttering in their speeches. And this is not something new that's just with Biden and Trump. I mean, it's been becoming a bigger issue with them, just because they also happen to have the older age. But even with Obama, they would make fun of him and stuff every time he stumbled. There's, on a word or something like that, says something wrong or whatever. People would blow that up. Now, a lot of that was due to the fact that his speeches was his strength. He, that's what kind of brought him to win the primary in 2008 and to end up being president. So that was his strength. And so a lot of times the opposition will attack your strength. They have to take out your strength. So that's when you have all the stuff like, well, he's using the teleprompter. Yeah. So his speeches aren't as magical. They don't give you the fuzzy feeling if you know he's reading something with a teleprompter. Ha ha. Right? Because they know you guys like to fall in love. Just like I said. And so therefore, if we can make it less magical, less falling in lovey, because I talk about a teleprompter, then all of a sudden you might not like them. Or we call them professorial. He's preaching, professoring to you. So they'll connect to some bad experience you've had with a teacher or professor who's lecturing to you and stuff, and use that type of language so that they can have that guilt by association feeling, latch on to somebody and take away their biggest strength and make it a weakness. Even though, he wasn't just saying hope, hope, change, change. Of course, he was saying that too. That was part of his main message. His, what do they call it? Slogan, pretty much. But he was talking about the subjects, substance too. He was talking about the issues and where he stood on the positions. Uh, Healthcare, especially, was a major issue back then, and all this other stuff. So he was talking about the issues. There was some meat on the bone that he was talking about as well too. But if you don't want to have to debate the issues, or maybe you not don't have as strong of an argument to debate the issues, you just take out the simple fact that he's a smooth talking person or whatever, and blah blah blah. And if as long as you don't listen to him and all that and fall for it, then uh you'll be all right or whatever. And so and I think it was a fairly effective strategy, but he still ended up winning twice. But I think that it also brought his popularity down during his presidency over the years, and made him less effective, that to the point where there was a lot of higher unprecedented levels of obstruction in a lot of ways, that they were able to get away with just fine, just because people were able to blame him for a lot of different things. So, but anyways, back to my point. We like to fall in love with the people that we vote for. We want to be starry-eyed. We want to, if there was a president that you can recall that you fell in love with, you want to have that feeling with that person, right? You don't want to just have some, eh, I mean, he holds all the right positions. He's all right, and I'll be able to rock out with him. And I usually I tend to use like Stephen Hawking as an example, for example, because I like him. I'm a science type of guy, and but he's in a wheelchair, and he's the computer to do his speech. So there's nothing that's necessarily sexy about all that. So I wonder, like, can a guy like that, who's extremely brilliant, brilliant than the vast majority of the people on this planet Earth, and might even be able to make an effective leader, would they even have a chance of being elected as president, or do we write them off just because they're not as sexy and stuff? They actually have computer programs that are able to measure how people's faces look in certain ways to determine, whether they're pretty or not, based upon golden ratios and different things like that. But they've done studies where computers can predict uh, with a lot better than 50% accuracy who's going to end up being elected into political office for various different places across the country, based upon the way they look. They've done studies as well with human beings where all they did, is show the pictures of the two people running, maybe in some area across the country that they don't even know about. But here's two people, they're running for the election. Pick which one, just by looking at the picture of their face, who's going to win. And the majority of the people actually get it right who ends up winning the race. And so at some point you have to wonder, it's like, hey, what are we voting about here? What matters more? Is it really the issues, or is something else going on here? Are we trying to have a love story happening? And if it comes down to a love story, if that's what people are looking for, then Biden's lost this election, because there's not much sexy about him. People aren't falling in love with Biden for the most part. For the most part, people are like, he's not Trump. He's a way better option than Trump. Maybe he share some, maybe show some common issues or whatever. But at the end of the day, it's not the one I fell in love with, not the one I voted for in the primary in 2020, but it's the guy I'll hold on to for right now to get through and get by. But there's a lot of folks that's like, you know what, man, if I'm not in love and I'm not feeling them, I don't want nobody. I'm going third party. And there's a lot of folks that have a feeling of righteousness. It's like, hey, if I vote third party or something, that makes me a better person. That makes me a better human, just because I'm doing something other than the two parties. And I don't necessarily subscribe to that myself. I think that you should make the most practical decision that makes sense for you and the country, right, and the people you love. So That's yeah, that's kind of the way I go about things. Whether that happens to be Democrat, Republican, or third party or whatever is some other issues. But a lot but what you should know is that our system's not really set up for third parties to prosper. It's set up for two parties. Usually what happens is there's most of the time there's two major parties. Sometimes one party might, get collapse and then a new alternative ends up rising up from the dust at some point. But essentially, there's really two parties that's kind of run things, and especially at the when it comes to a presidential election, because it once you like I talked about earlier, the difference between majority and plurality. If somebody you need a majority of the electoral votes, 270 is the magic one number to win. So you have to have more than half of the electoral votes. 538, half of that is 269, so that'll be 50%. So you need 50% plus one more vote. So 270 actually ends up being the magic number that you have to win, have to win the election. Now, if you have a whole bunch of third parties, let's say you have there's like 10 different candidates, and they're all doing roughly evenly, and they spread that 538 votes, about 53 or 54 votes each, all those candidates gets. Guess what? No, even if there's one candidate that has more than everybody else, maybe that person has 55 and everybody else is a little bit lower than that. Even if that person has the most, they do not win the presidency if they don't get the 270. You have to get the 270. All right. And so the nice thing about when there's only two candidates in the system that's set up that way is that there's a good chance you're going to get the 270. The only way you don't get 270 is if both candidates gets 269 on the dot. They have to tie. That's the only way they don't get 270. All right. And again, in that case, it's not there's a extra process that happens. So when nobody gets 270, what happens is your House of Representative ends up picking your president, and the Senate ends up picking your vice president. So it goes out of the uh, you know, the states through the electoral college's hand. It just goes to Congress, and so you have to pay attention to who's running Congress. Right now, the Republicans have the most seats. It's not directly based upon the seats; they do something based on each state delegations or whatever. And but at the end of the day, right now there's a Republican lean on that. So that's where that stands at, right? So you would think, it's probably a Trump win if it goes down that line. And there are some third party candidates that are doing semi decent, but the thing is, you can't just have a semi decent portion of the national vote. You actually, in order for a third party to even have a chance of doing things, they actually have to win states. They have to have the most votes in at least a good number of states, and that's a harder metrics to do. It's easier for a third party candidate to cause, I don't know, maybe have cause some trouble in one or two states here or there or whatever. But a lot of times, because they're not really winning a good big portion of states, what ends up happening is they're just taking a small portion of every state. And because that small portion of every state, usually that third party candidate is more similar to one of the parties than the other party. And because of that, uh, people tend to look at it as they're basically stealing votes. They steal the election away from the person that they're closest to, because folks that would have probably voted for one of the two major parties ended up voting third party instead. And because they did that, instead of voting for that major party candidate lost, and the other party won. So the party that was less like even less closer to the views that they held, ends up not end up ends up not ends up being the one that wins. So it is a plant spoiler, and part of that's because the system's kind of set up in a way that doesn't make it easy for a third party candidate to win. All right, because so you got to have that 50% at least number, and that really means that you really need to narrow the race down to two people in order to make sure that that 50% threshold is easily met. Once you start watering it down with too many candidates, the likelihood that nobody gets 50% increases significantly. And so therefore you end up having Congress vote pick your president every year, and that's something that you don't want to nobody's going to be happy with what that end up being a solution for how our country goes forward. So, and you would need an amendment or something like that to change how things are going. And I don't see that happening anytime soon. When was the last time an amendment passed? Amendments used to pass a whole lot more often, but we're in a gridlock era. I talked about a Martin Luther King quote. I'd said, hatred paralyzes life, love releases it, right? I'll say the whole quote. Hatred confuses life, love harmonizes. Hatred darkens life, but love hallucinates. illuminates it. But the key things I was focusing on there is the hatred paralyzes life while love releases it. Our Congress, our politics, our government has been paralyzed. There's a lot of gridlock and obstruction that's basically going on, where people aren't are it's basic things aren't able to happen. We can't keep the lights on. Trying to do basic thing that should be easy are suddenly hard. And so that's because there's so much hatred, animosity, lack of trust, lack of proximity to the other side. Our politics changed from where our politicians used to be friends with each other from both across the aisle. They used to go to lunch with each other all the time, work out with each other, even roommate with each other sometime in DC while they're in DC, and because that's their home away from home, while their family might be back in their home state or something like that. But they changed things up. They started telling folks like, hey, don't be friends with folks on the opposite side of the aisle. Um, don't and actually, don't yeah, don't be friends with folks on the opposite side of the aisle. Move your family to DC and just live with them. So don't be rooming up with none of the people. Save money or become a good front close buddy with folks in there. You need to make this about tough and fighting and it's the same type of spirit where some people when they watching sports and basketball or something like that, they be like, hey, these people in the league, they over there shaking hands and giving hugs and all this other stuff with the competitors across the aisle, where maybe some other generations wanted to destroy them, and that might look sexy and attractive in a sports game or whatever. But here we are in a democratic republic. We're trying to get our our government to work and function and actually have impacts on some people's life. Do we really need the hate element or not? And I'd argue, and that's why I talked about Martin Luther King and how his message was about love, because you got to be able to see the big picture and how things all fit together with it. Uh, but our politics have been paralyzed, and I would say largely it's been a Republican leading the way with that, because those government shutdowns, it's always them starting it. Those government shutdowns, blocking it. They're usually trying to extort legislation from the minority out of the majority. So uh, if you don't give us some what we want, we're just not. We're gonna block you from being able to pass anything. We're gonna make sure the government shuts down. So we're gonna. It's kind of like, I want to take my ball and go home, or I want to flip the Monopoly game over, and destroy the whole game so nobody gets to play. We can't even have the basic functions work basically if I can't get what I want. So that's kind of like a hijacking thing. It's extorting things. That's not a spirit of love, right? That's not spirit of cooperation. And government shutdowns didn't used to be the norm, but it's becoming a norm. And all of the government shutdowns were pretty much against Democrats when the Democrats were in the White House, right? Because the people blame the president. They blindly blame the president, like I was talking about at the beginning here about everything. So when things go bad, the government shut down, that means things aren't functioning, people aren't getting what they're supposed to. All of a sudden, you get a whole bunch of disgruntled government workers that aren't getting paid and different things like that. Uh, they're going to take it out on the president. So what's going on? Because that's what the people that create the subscribers going to do. Say, hey, you're the president. You're supposed to lead, even though those people don't want to follow, right? They're doing everything they can not to make sure that there's chaos and stuff, because that increases their chances of getting in office. Uh, but it's been Republicans doing that. The only time there was one government shutdown under the Trump administration, though. But even Trump openly admitted that he was going to shut the thing down, because again, he was trying to force legislation out of the Democrats, but uh, through the building his border wall, basically. And so the government shutdown, that's really a bill about funding. Where are we going to allocate our money in order to keep the government running? It shouldn't have anything to do with I don't know, you're trying to, well, Obamacare passed fair and square, and so you're trying to unpass it, so to speak, just to uh deal with the budget. And because budget really deals with discretionary spending, not in this, and that's different from non-discretionary spending. And Obamacare, the American the ACA bill didn't was not part of the discretionary spending at all. Basically, it's funded itself based on without outside of the budget process. So, anyways, uh, tools like that, the government shutdowns, debt ceiling defaults, you can, the Democrats, they don't do those against Republicans. Do that. They work with them in the past stuff. And that's part of the reason why when you look at the data, when Republicans are in office, they end up spending more money. Why? Because Democrats aren't blocking them at the same rate that the Republicans usually are blocking them. So they allow government to actually function and work and pass things and try to collaborate to get things done a little bit more so than the Republicans do. So Republicans pretty much try to fight tooth and nail, and it's kind of like the ends justify the means type of thing, trying to get power at the end of the day. And so it's a debt filling defaults. Even if you listen to the base, you look into the Fox News, the right wing news and radio and stuff like that. Every time there are always ones that are just licking their fingers over the opportunity to have a debt ceiling default. They're even talking to their base and trying to convince them it's just not going to be as bad as people say it is if we default. It won't be as bad if our credit is, rating is lowered and all this other stuff. They try to soften you or prepare you for it because that's what they're trying to create, the culture of it, and they're actually looking forward to it, so they get antsy about it. But if you listen to the left-wing news sources and media and the biggest figures and heads that are out there, that's not the nature of what they're talking about at all. They're trying to get they're trying to get the government running, keeping the lights on, doing its basic things. Shouldn't have the default shouldn't even need the debt ceiling. At the end of the day, if you pass the bill to spend the money, then that's it right there, right? um Either pass the bill, spend the money, and at that point, that's where the ceiling automatically raises with it, or you get rid of the ceiling altogether. But the ceiling ends up just being a little toy that got placed on there to use as something to create the battles and stuff, to try to extort legislation otherwise. So give me what I want in all these other ways, even though I have a minority. Otherwise, we're gonna make you look bad, and the public's gonna blame you because your party's in the White House. And so that's where we're at. And then you also have the stealing of Supreme Court justices. If um, you know, those type of things where you have to try to go back, hundreds of years and stuff like that to try to find examples of something even semi close to try to make what you did look justifiable, even though right after that you backtrack and when things were turned the other way around, you weren't like, oh, we're not going to wait till the election to happens to allow a nomination to come up. We're just going to, appoint somebody into the seat, right? And McConnell admitted that right out, and the media started laughing, and they know what the deal is of how this stuff is working out. So the media laughed about it, McConnell laughed about it because we all know what it is. But a lot of those media figures, they're trying to be uh, in the middle and not partisan or whatever, and so they just show you the video of what it is and hope that you're smart enough to see what's going on here. But at the end of the day, it's up to you to be smart enough to see what's going on there. That there's a game that's going on here. But at the end of the day, hatred paralyzes life, love releases it. That's what MLK says. If you can make folks hate other folks, then the ends justify the means at the end of the day, and you can get away and do anything, no matter how extreme our politics were. And I've explained over the past month in February how over time more and more gridlock happened. Filibuster didn't become a thing until they started using it to fight back against racial legislation, civil rights legislation. They were trying to block that. Southerners were. And so this is where the gridlock come up. And if you look at different graphs on cloture votes and all that other stuff, you can see how those ratcheted up over the years. And if you actually break it down based upon who has the majority in the Senate or not, it's usually when the Republicans are in the minority, that's when it ratchets up to a new level that was higher above what it was before, probably about double as much as what it used to be. And then when it flips around the other way and the Democrats in the minority, they kind of they raise it up to that same level the Republicans just raised it to. Then the Republicans get back in the office, and then they raise it even higher, and so on and so forth. And they were doing that all the way up through to Obama, where they doubled how much the filibuster was even being used to even super high heights and stuff. And so it's just a cat and mouse game. Nobody wants to get wiped off the map by the opposition. So it's like if they obstruct, you feel like you have to obstruct too to make sure that you can, fairly compete in the country so that you don't just watch yourself get beat the whole time. But you want to actually win some battles and see legislation go in the direction that you want to too. So, but if we do this blind both sides do it without paying attention to the magnitude at which one side might do it compared to another. It's kind of like saying, hey, both sides are violent when one person just touched somebody's hand and the other person punched them in the face, right? It's like, yeah, both sides. Well, sometimes that both sidesism is not necessarily good stuff. So we have to be careful. I can't remember the quote off the top of my head from Martin Luther King about, that about be careful about how being unpassionate and being kind of moderate, lukewarm about things all the time, because a lot of times people they fetish the idea of being in the moderate middle, of not taking sides or not being a part of one of the parties and just having apathy to certain extents and all this sort of stuff. Uh, that has negative consequences too. Even in the Bible they talk about being lukewarm. I'd rather you be hot or cold, spew you out type of thing. There's nothing that's inherently uh noble about simply not abstaining or staying in the middle, or make sure you're halfway between both parties, because one thing you have to realize is that the parties shift over time. They become more extreme, further to the left, further to the right, on the political spectrum, and so the parties are moving all over the place. And sometimes the country is moving more to the left, more to the right, and stuff like that. And so where your middle is has to be somewhere new every day when you're trying to figure out what the new um, Overton window is. If you look that word up, the Overton window, basically, the idea of what making stuff the new normal, stuff that seems extreme. You know, so a lot of stuff that's going on today, 10 years ago would have been extreme and like out of question. You wouldn't have happened. And the Overton window is the window of stuff views that are more like that are likely to that people think are normal, basically, that are okay. This is within normal bounds. But as over time, these windows slightly, slowly shift one way and the other and stuff, and all of a sudden, things that were once extreme and out of line, out of question, become the new norm. Uh, that those extremes started happening a little bit quicker once Trump got in office, because he's like a toddler that pushes his boundaries to see what he can get away with. Somebody says, "What? That's illegal? Do it anyways." He's that type of guy. So so that Overton window shift quite a bit, and people were amazed at how much folks were willing to get on board and jump on that bandwagon. Because usually, if somebody made that big of a shift, they would be reprimanded, right? You can't try; you have to slowly shift these windows over time. It's the snail race, because people don't pay attention to slow trains, changes over slow time. Over the videos that I talked about over the last month, as I talked about the transition of technology over the time and as it affects race, over this is over decades, even the centuries, right? um the not just transition of technology, but how even the language that we use, and the words and what impact they use, how based on if you change the rules. And I compared that to social media, how they police with algorithms and stuff, and that doesn't necessarily change people's hearts to be better people, but they just find different ways around the rules. If this is not acceptable anymore, okay, we're going to do something else. Just like when, okay, I can't LGBT stuff start coming along, I can't use the F word anymore, then my views may not have changed, but I find ways around it so that I can be socially acceptable, right? Same thing happens with race. It's like, hey, all of a sudden, we can be canceled for being racist and stuff. Okay, well, I can't just blatantly come out and say, hey, I don't like you because you're black or something like that. Instead, I'm going to say something that, I can find ways of not mentioning race and still having the same impact. Those are things that have happened over the history of this country. And understanding that from a long view wins, a wide out there lens, right? So you can see the full picture. You see the whole forest and not just the individual trees. Um, so appreciating how the Overton whistles usually shifts slowly over time, to where one day you're in a different location. It's not until you stop and think, it's like, wait a minute, man, 10 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, this would have been out of question, crazy. And here we are, right? And I don't think people pay enough attention to what's going on, that they can easily be nudged. It's kind of like you turn up the heat on the fire slowly and surely. You might be taking a nice warm bath, and next thing you know, by the time you realize the water's bubbling and it's too hot, you're paralyzed and you're done for, right? You're being served in that pot later on for dinner. So that same type of thing happens in our politics, where we lose track of ourselves because we're not paying attention to the big picture, the long game, and all that other stuff. All right. So right, right now, if it's between Trump and Biden, my vote is still in the Biden camp, just because the Trump camp, they have the democracy problem, the democracy issue. Trump, he not only does he just, he gravitates and likes all the dictators and authoritarians and stuff. He desires to be that himself. He pushes for it and everything. He wants to be a dictator just for day one, is what he says. Uh, but at the end of the day, we didn't even know if he was going to give up the White House in 2020, right? The news people were just wondering, trying to figure out, it's like, is he going to leave the White House? He's going to leave by January 20th, when Biden gets nominated. I don't know. Is it going to be a fight? And it was news that, hey, he's actually going to leave. He said he's going to leave out to Maryland. And he left maybe a few days earlier. So, there's this element about Donald Trump where he doesn't respect the institutions that we have, basically. He doesn't want to keep the lights on and the basics of the thing. And it's not just Trump. I don't want to make it just about him, because the Republican Party was heading down a certain direction already, and Trump just took advantage and took it to the next level. And a lot of the things that I talked about over the past month, in terms of how you let love be the thing that kind of drives what you do, as opposed to um, just seeing only the trees and not realizing the whole forest. A lot of times people grab onto these big ideologies they don't fully understand: the Democrat, Republican, the liberal, progressive, and conservative, and all this other stuff. And they fall in love with these big ideologies. They don't even understand what the implications of them all are, and contradictions, and all this other stuff. Really need to just peel things back to the basics and be like, hey, love is what's going to follow, going to be what's going to guide me. Truth is going to matter to me, and let's just work there and work our way up and build up all our viewpoints from there. I think I was fortunate that when I first started getting into politics, I didn't have a whole lot of views at that time, and I intentionally constructed my views from the bottom up that way, before somebody else started influencing me and putting ideas in my head and start, one way or another. So that's kind of how I end up where I am on things. But I've talked about how we have our trust issues based on proximity. The people closest to us, we trust them, we give them the benefit of the doubt. We're not going to allow some conspiracy to just come up and discredit their name without any hard evidence and stuff. We defend them and stuff. But the people that are not as close to us, maybe they're a different race, maybe they're, different party, different, all this other stuff. The standards are different. We don't give them the benefit of the doubt. It's more like, I wouldn't put it past them. All of a sudden, the logical standards that we think we're consistent about suddenly start shifting around. And so for some reason, all of our conspiracy theories that we believe in are against the other side of the aisle, but none of them conveniently are about us, right? So all these different things, I've been slightly sliding in a little bit of politics over the past month, so you guys can see how this stuff maps in. Because while some of these issues may seem separately, they all come together. This explains why we are where we are, because we have our different identity groups that we cleave to and stuff like that, and we look at the other side as the enemy, as evil, and we want to be we fetish our innocence in a lot of ways, and so because of that, we want to rain down destruction on our enemies. And so because of that, when you get to situations such as the election of 2020, right, and whether it was stolen, a lot of times we just trust our gut feelings. Somebody just comes and tell us, like, your vote don't really count. That there's people that make the decisions. Actually, I was looking at somebody's page yesterday. They had said it was in 2016, before the election, before Trump got in office, right? Because Hillary had won the primary and beat what you call it, Bernie Sanders. They were like, oh man, this stuff is already picked by some big people, man. That's, the way they cheated to make sure she won that. They already know who's going to win the elections. It's waiting that, Hillary's going to win the final election too, because they're going to cheat to make sure she won. Well, guess what? She didn't win. So a lot of folks that were already saying this stuff about that's how it's going to turn out, they were wrong, because Trump ended up winning. So All of a sudden, after he won, all the talk about stealing the election and all that stuff that Trump was predicting and all these other folks was predicting disappeared and vanished suddenly. Nobody had nothing to say. And it didn't come back until the next election when Trump actually lost, right? Then the conspiracies went back to thrive mode all of a sudden again. So people can flip to both sides of an issue very quickly and easily and conveniently without even consciously being aware of it, that they're doing it. It's just out of convenience, whatever narratives in that moment, whatever mood they feeling in, right? You know, if they're feeling some type of way, that is what it is right now, and they just flow with it from one day to the next, based upon the people that they have proximity to. Uh, but as soon as Trump's not doesn't win, all of a sudden now they're doing all this other stuff, and they they take advantage of people's innocence, not innocence, but ignorance about how politics work. People don't realize that you know they really don't understand how the whole voting process actually works. So you can make up a whole lot of stuff about cheating. It's like, see this video, you see these suitcases and and boxes and stuff. Normal behaviors, you can make them look real sexy into bad behaviors, right? And destroy people's lives. And Trump got sued, not Trump, but Rudy Giuliani got sued, for and lost his lawsuit for millions of dollars against the two black ladies that were in Georgia because of that, right? Making up lies about people just because you want to put some narrative about it on there. Uh, and Trump did push the conspiracy along with his lawyers and stuff too, but they just didn't sue Trump directly for whatever reasons. So but we people can make up stories, and a lot of times we'll just gravitate to whatever feels right to us, right? Whatever we want to have happen or don't want to have happen, that tends to guide where people stand on things. So you really didn't need evidence about stealing election. It was just more so, man, I wouldn't put it past them because those Democrats, I hate them, they're dirty. Y'all wouldn't put it past them. Oh, I know. You got all this evidence that they're pulling this case together in Georgia about interfering with the election and stuff against Trump and all his folks, but for some reason, uh, there's no evidence about you can't pull that evidence together for Biden and the rest of the folks. Why can't anybody pull all they ain't got no tapes of Biden trying to do nothing. They just keep their stuff that clean, right? So a lot of times you got to watch out in politics too, because a lot of times one side will accuse the other side of doing something just so they can justify their extremism in doing the same behavior that they want to do in the first place back. But they're not doing it back. They're actually the initiators of it. And that's what the 2020 election fraud stuff was all about. Because what they'll do is they'll find one random person. George, not George, but DeSantis in Florida, the Florida governor, he ended up I think he ended up trying to arrest he did arrest a whole bunch of folks, that felons basically, for voter fraud or whatever, because the majority of them, they were told actually by driver's license places and other folks that they could vote, right? They checked, they double checked, and then those folks were saying, hey, you can vote. It's like, because at first they were like, no, I have a felony, I'm not supposed to be voting. And then it's like, no, I think you can. Let's look into it, or it won't hurt if you vote anyways. It was a whole bunch of cases that were like that, and I think the judges, a lot of those judges end up throwing those cases out at the end of the day. But DeSantis ended up gaining a whole bunch of prestige because it was only like a couple dozen or so cases. It wasn't a whole lot of people. It was nothing to change election. But he ended up saying, it's like, I'm fighting for you, the people, to clean up our elections. I'm the person doing the work, and you can vote for me. And he does a lot of stunts and stuff that gets people behind him and all this other stuff. But that type of stuff, people take advantage of because it wins over voters. It's the sexy stuff that folks like. Even though at the end of the day, it doesn't really change anything about our politics. And really, all you have, when somebody wants to have doubt, all you need is one person. Find one person that actually committed voter fraud, right? And most of the people that I actually, you know, that were actually that I know of that were prosecuted were actually Republicans at that note. But at the end of the day, all you have to do is find one person that actually legitimately commit their voter fraud, and that actually happens every year. But when you have 300 million people in the country or whatever, one person here or there committing voter fraud doesn't impact a single election. And this is why we don't have our elections are not ran at the federal level. It's not just like one big person organizing it, and it's from the top down. because that's an election that's easy to manipulate on a large scale. All of a sudden, if you impact it at the top here, it's going to rain down benefits at the bottom. So we have localized elections, that are ran by each local individual thing or whatever. It's hard to have some influence across the scale or whatever, without including like thousands or even millions of people. And once you get that many people in on it, secrets don't stay secret. It's just like that's why Trump stuff is coming out to the open. That's why we're prosecuting it now. It's hard for stuff to stay keep secret when you got too many people playing a part in it. And so that's why, but the conspiracy theorists seem like, well, the fact that you can't see it just shows you how much powerful they are in covering it up, right? The lack of the evidence becomes evidence of the conspiracy. And so you get that type of crazy stuff happening there. Um, but again, you would not be able to do that type of conspiracy against the people that they like, the people that they love. They would want the benefit of the doubt before you throw a conspiracy upon them and assume that they've done something. And because you don't see evidence of them doing it, that's probably evidence that they covered it up. They wouldn't want you to do that to them, right? They would want you to give them fair, uh, you know, to treat them fairly about that stuff. But again, we don't it's not a reciprocal thing. We don't do it to all people. A lot of us, we feel like we can treat our politicians any old way. We can talk bad about politicians we hate bad anyway, the media that we hate any old way. The people that are members of the other party or ideology, we can talk to them any old way, throw any old labels on them. We don't have to give folks a fair shake. We don't have to love everybody equally. And that's why I told you Martin Luther King message is lost because nobody wants to love each other anymore. We want to love just the people that we like, just the people that are close to us, the folks that we have an invested interest in. Everybody else, not too much going on there. So when all those, 62 or so 60 some odd different court cases dealing with the election, they all throw out all these different allegations because there's really no basis for it all. um they know that the American people aren't going to read the transcripts of what was happening in those court cases. Did you read them? Go ahead and say no, because I know you didn't. Of course, the majority, all this stuff is public record. I know the federal government, they don't tend to, the federal government, they don't tend to, uh, they don't tend to show their court case stuff on TV because TV stuff would actually get our attention. We would know going on. People take their popcorn out. And we like those court cases, kind of like the what the Amber Heard and all that stuff, whatever. So if it was on TV, it's going to be a little bit more sexier for folks and folks tuning in a little bit more. But when it's not on TV and at the federal level, it tends to not be, and so therefore, you just have the transcripts of it. They know folks don't read the transcripts, so what people do is try to spin what happens there. Oh, this is what happened, and that's what, if you read the transcript, you can figure out for yourself because nobody's arguing that actually the transcripts are wrong. They made up those transcripts. They don't have to argue that because they know you're not going to read it. So you have to keep yourself informed and stay on top of it. I know it's work, but if you want to keep your democracy, your democratic republic, then that's what you have to do because at the foundation of a democracy or a democratic republic is the vote. Your vote has to mean something, right? And if somebody can convince you to lean in on your cynicism to say, hey, your vote means nothing, it's all rigged anyways, without having to prove any evidence of it, um, they've already undermined the democracy. That's how you get people fighting at the Capitol, right? Because there's a social contract there. The social contract says we're going to be peaceful for each other. We're going to obey the rules. We're going to do all this stuff. And we're going to be able to lose, like, with grace, and when we lose and win with grace too, and transfer power peacefully and all that sort of stuff. This is how people play fairly on the playground. That's based upon the vote. We gotta respect that vote. As soon as somebody starts saying without evidence, that vote, you can't trust it. You can't trust it. I don't have to tell you who they is. You don't have to show no names, or maybe you do show some names, but you ain't got no evidence against those names because you just pick people you don't like. But they are out there to get you. Then what? Well, come on now, you're undermining our whole country. Now, if we can't do it peacefully and folks cheating to get in office, then it's like, well, I ain't got no reason to listen to them. Man, let's get the mubs out of office now. So we got to fight. the point of the vote was so that we can do it peacefully. If you get rid of the peaceful way, then they got folks ready to fight. And so that's why we say democracy is on the ballot. It's an issue. It's not people being exaggerating this. That's the foundation. That's the fundamentals of our country. Tommy Lauren was over there tweeting before the election, was like, if the Democrats lose, they're probably going to get violent or fight or whatever, all this other stuff. Turns out it was the Trump that votes that ended up losing. They were the one that got violent and start fighting and stuff. So, because they don't really understand where violence comes from and how it breaks down in certain and what leads folks to those positions. They couldn't see it coming at all because they associated the 2020 Black Lives Matter protests and how some of that there was some violence that broke out into different cities and stuff like that with that. So they're used to the Democratic Party having at its base a lot of disenfranchised populations, and people who are disenfranchised that don't feel like they're getting a fair shake for what various reasons, one shape or the other, they're more likely to be people that are going to be lashing out. The people that are getting the legislation the way they want to, that they make up the majority of the population, so that whoever they vote for is actually the people that end up controlling stuff and looking out for their interests, they're less likely to be the ones that are going to have to lash out because they're getting the fair shape out. They're going to have the fair share out of things, especially in democracy. They have the majority, and so that's the nature of the things. But if you get rid of the vote altogether, all of a sudden, even the majority, it says, "Hold on, you just took my power too." You convince folks that their vote don't matter. Now, folks ready to fight. Now, folks is doing all this extra crazy stuff, and you even have folks, like Trump, trying to make sure that they get off easy with a slap on the wrist, or not even that. As a result, he's planning to get folks out of jail and all this other stuff, pardoning folks. Even those obviously that they committed all this other stuff. They want to play the victim mentality game and try to make it into something else. And so there's a lot of illness that's going on in the Republican Party. You have to do the basics right. I don't even have to get into the issues and talk about, what do you think about abortion? Or what do I think about healthcare? What do I think about our deficits and our debt and how we budget our money and so on and so forth? All that stuff stops mattering once you're trying to break apart the government that we have. You're trying to get rid of our democracy. And that's what happens when you attack the vote. You get rid of that vote, you've lost the democracy. And it's like, okay, whoever I installed in office, that's supposed to be the leader from here on out. And the votes won't matter at no point after that, because, hey, if I lose, I just have to say, don't trust it. Right, just like Trump did in 2020. But if he wins, just like in 2016, after the election's over with, he ain't got to say nothing else about it and keep on moving, keep on walking like everything's normal, everything's good. And so we pretend like it's truly a democracy just because we hold votes. But there's other countries out there in the world that hold votes that aren't truly democracies either, right? Russia, they just ended up killing one of the opposition leaders, Navalny. Over there, that was in the news recently, right? So they don't really have fair elections over that way anyways, when all the opposition ends up dying off and stuff like that. Come on now, I mean, that's not real true elections. But every election period, they're saying, hey, Putin got elected back in the office. Yeah, man, that truly won. So but that's where we're heading towards. That's going to become the new normal if we keep this up. If we play footsie with it. And right now, Trump is winning in the he's winning in the polls and stuff. It's early on, so I don't try to put stock this early on. Once it starts getting to about June, give them a few months to start making their message and stuff. Then I'd look back at the polls and look at things, because they just now got their presumptive nominee in Trump, basically, with Nikki Haley dropping out. So Biden probably wasn't attacking Trump directly head on as much. I mean, a little bit he definitely does, because he knows he's going to be a candidate, but he didn't pick a favorite, so to speak, into between Nikki Haley versus Trump type of thing. He didn't want to have that type of influence, basically, because it can backfire you in different reasons. I don't have to go into that, but he needs to be able to go all in and have a platform, have a message, and see how he's going to fight back against the messaging that Trump has for him. Because for the most part, the Republicans, as they've been going through their debates and their whole primary, they've been focusing most of their energy at Joe Biden. They fight a little bit with each other, but they probably been put more energy towards Joe Biden. So, and Biden hasn't really been doing much counteracting, at least on a national level. Maybe some of the local uh, places that have primaries early on, they might have seen some advertising, some mess pushback there. But he's not going all out, spending and wasting all his money because he knows he pretty much already has his primary defeated. So a lot of that money you're trying to save in your war bag for the general election to go all in and have some more money to fight with for Trump. So so you want to give them opportunity to actually put their effort out there, put their message out there, see what it is, see if they're effective with it, and then from that moment you can go forward and try to say, okay, see where things are landing. But what I do know is the same thing that happened in 2016 and 2020. Those polls were actually accurate if you know how to read them correctly. Don't pay attention to folks who says that Trump's 2 points ahead or 3 points behind or stuff like that. That's really not how you should be reading polls. Those polls, they might ask you, pick between the two candidates, right? But they'll give you a third option of maybe undecided or a third party, right? So when you add up the two numbers that Trump and Biden have, that doesn't add up to 100%. So in other words, there's some folks that they consider to be likely voters that didn't even vote for one of those two candidates. Whereas we know on election day, usually 98 to 99% of the people end up voting for those two candidates anyways. And so a lot of those folks are undecided. And if nobody has the 50% magic number, those undecideds could go either way. Now, in a normal election with generic candidates in it, it's split. You just split it down the middle 50-50. You expect about half of the undecideds might go one way, half the other, if you're trying to be fair and not biased in how you analyze this thing. And so then from that perspective, the 2 points ahead or 2 point behind makes sense because they keep that same difference as you split it down the middle at 50-50. But you have to add a little bit of political intelligence to your interpretation of what's going to happen with that undecided vote. Because, like I said earlier, people know where they stand on Trump for the most part. You either love him or you hate him. I don't run into lukewarm people on Trump. All right, that's not what it is. You love him or hate him, and so people know where they stand on him. So when you start seeing these big margins of undecided voters in election, I'm like, who's undecided about Trump? Those are people who are was it they talk about the Bradley effect, where there was a black candidate that people didn't want to tell posters in California. Uh, they didn't want to tell posters that they were voting against the black person because they didn't want to seem racist or something like that. And so therefore they'd say that they're voting for Bradley, but then by election day they really voted for the other guy, right? You have certain social influences that you have to be aware of, where that might be driving how people tell posters differently from how they actually vote. And the same thing kind of happens with the Trump. I wouldn't call it's not race related as much as Trump does a lot of abhorrent behavior that anybody, even both sides of the aisle, can agree that he does that. And so not a lot of people don't like to publicly admit that they like him or plan on voting for him because they don't want that judgment to also fall upon them. And so if a pollster call or anybody call, they're not going to say Trump. They're just going to be like, I don't know, I ain't made up my mind yet. If they don't want to say Biden, if they don't want to lie Biden, which most of them don't, they'll just say they're undecided. That's the safest bet you can do. And by the time election day comes, they actually do end up voting for Trump. And so what I basically did in my analysis when I made my prediction is I assumed that the vast majority, 90+% of that undecided vote would fall into the Trump column. And so for the most part, Hillary Clinton and Biden, when they ran against Trump, they had to be pretty much almost like at 49 to 50% of the vote. They had to be at that mark, about 49% or so, in order to win that race. No matter how many points they showed them being ahead of Trump, because if they were like 48, it could be maybe 48 at the lowest, but depending on the circumstances in the state. But if they were 47 or lower, Trump tended to take that state, and that's what I predicted. Even though they said in polls show Biden ahead by blah blah Trump, Trump 39, Biden 47 or something. I was like, oh no, Biden ain't gonna win that because all those undecided votes they're gonna go in the Trump camp when it comes to time to vote. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. So most of the numbers that the Democrats had in 2016 and 2020, they matched. They matched pretty closely. Maybe it might have gone up 1-2% at max. but probably about 1% maybe percentage point upward they might go up. But for the most part, they had to have that state won already at the 50% level. Um, or else that undecided vote was going to push Trump over the top to end up winning that state. And that's the way I read the polls. And so when everybody else says the polls are lying to you, no, those polls told you exactly what they're supposed to tell you. You just didn't know how to interpret it correctly. And not, I'm a mathematics and statistics professor, so I know how to think about these things a little bit better and interpret them correctly. Most people do not know how to interpret that stuff the same way and do that correctly. So and of course you got to understand the politics and all those factors and weigh that in appropriately as well. So with that said, um that's how that's gonna end up being the case eventually too. uh, and this election is a little bit different because absence makes the heart grow fonder. When Trump gets out of office, people were like, "I can't wait to get this dude out of office." So there's a lot of folks that was like, "Oh my gosh, this dude's terrible." In 2020, and that's the reason why he's gone. He was handling pandemic terribly. He's causing problems and issues every day. But at the same time, we kind of wanted them back to normalcy with the Biden back in office, but like I said, we like sexy politicians, so some of that drama and stuff, people are addicted to that. It's kind of like when you date somebody who's toxic, right? It's like, oh my gosh, making love to a toxic person, like it is the greatest, even though it's toxic. You shouldn't be doing it, and you know it ain't no good for you, right? That's same type of dynamic happens with Trump and all this other stuff, but we do treat our politics like relationships. Like we just like in a relationship where you have the honeymoon stage, you have the new love that's fresh and is fired up. We love it and we're addicted to that. There are people who do that, and once the honeymoon stage wear off and the love wear down, they feel like, oh, I must not be in love no. I'm just gonna move on to the next one and just repeat that honeymoon stage over and over, expecting that the feelings are gonna be intense and as passionate forever in a relationship when that's just not how it tends to work. Uh, you just have to have a different something stronger undergirding it basically than just the feelings and emotions the whole time. But so there's a lot of people in the date market that just go from fling to fling because they're just chasing that high every time from the new person living in that Hollywood stage. Now, politics is the same way. We like to that new outsider. Ooh, he's outside of politics. So I'm gonna vote for that person, right? Whereas the person that's been in office for several years or has some type of record and stuff, we tend to fall out of love with those folks. Their honeymoon stage is over, and so therefore we're ready to get rid of them and move on and vote some new folks in to get rid of the swamp and put in some new folks. We put some nice colorful terminology about it, but it's really the same effect. We like the new folks, the folks that are new. They're sexier. They just we haven't heard them before. They speak all the nice words on the campaign trail and all this other stuff, and they can come into office and do exactly what they promised to do. But it's once they get in office and do what they promise to do, the media tends to focus on the negative sides of things, and so there's a lot of complaints about the politician, and folks just jump on board with that bandwagon. They stop as you actually start having a record and you vote on things and you hold the positions. People make those positions look bad, even though during the campaign people was for them, right? It's like, hey, you're making your argument pretty strongly. I voted for you, right? Once you actually go into office and actually try to pass universal health care, wait a minute, hold on, what are you doing there? I don't like this, and suddenly you like we make up these narratives where we say the politicians lost their way. What really is it really them that lost their way, or was it us? Did we change? Sometimes we're not very good at pointing the fingers back at ourselves. We like to scapegoat things a lot of times, and it's the same thing in relationships. We say that everybody else is terrible and trash, and that's why we have to move on, but we never look at ourselves and see what role we play and how we toxically jump around from one thing to the next and can't settle down peacefully with one scenario with one person or ride out with a politician without them having to be sexy and spice things up. Sometimes you don't need all that drama. Sometimes being calm, collected, and boring is a good thing. Uh, and so our politics can be that way, just like our relationships. And I think we think about it the same way. We want somebody macho in office who touts tough and sounds hard and has these good clapbacks and is entertaining and makes us laugh. We show up at a rally and it's more of an experience. than it is, about anything else. And so uh it's all about the image. It's, just like when folks show up in a relationship, we want the, oh, he's macho, he's masculine, he's saying all the right things, he's doing all this, whatever. Some of the substance stuff ends up taking the background, and all the stuff that's turning us on and drawing us in ends up coming to the foreground that really don't matter at the end of the day in terms of what the duties of the job really supposed to be about. And so that's where we're at. That's where we're at in America. We're in a love story. But yeah, put your comments in on the post. I'll reply back to them. Let me know what you think about this race as things keep going along. Like I said, it's premature, but as things start going through the summer and tightening up, start approaching getting closer to the conventions in July and August, around that season, that's where you really start seeing where things are coming to come up. So right now, polls look like Biden's in trouble, but and I guess, like I said, absence makes the heart grow fonder. When he's been gone for a while, you start thinking about that ex and like, I kind of missed him, man. The way he used to look in my eyes, or she used to do. And all of a sudden you hook back up with him, you start remember. It's like, oh my gosh, I remember why I broke up with him for the first place, type of stuff. We're in that type of stage with the Trump right now. So he's actually doing a lot better since he's been out of office. Media hasn't been covering him as much, depending on what media you're listening to. So all right, so I'll stop that right there. There's definitely a whole lot more I could say, a lot more discussions we can go, but we're gonna wrap this thing up right here. Leave your comments. I'll definitely reply for those. If you got any ideas of some future things to talk about, whether it's about politics or things you want me to address, put those in the comments too. Be happy to do them. All right, like this page, share the video, tag people that you think should need to watch this video. And I try to make things weave back into a lot of things I've talked about previously, so you guys can understand how my perspectives on life also influence my politics. These aren't individual things that I just these are things I constructed myself, not just picked up from other folks. So hopefully you appreciate what I put together, and we'll keep the conversations going. So it is Women's History Month, so I'll definitely give a shout out to the women this month as well. All right. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other. Like, share, tag the video. Peace. And we are gone. Antonio Bone Beats. On TikTok. He's responsible for the music. Antonio Bone Beats. Beats with a C at the end. I'll even show you.